You know that song, We're All the Way Live. We're all the way live. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Remixing Relationships. It starts now. Oh, we got a good show for you today, 100%. For sure. This is going to be a sequel or a kind of like a part two, I guess I would say, or we would say, to the episode when we were talking about pieces of love. When women say, I would rather have a piece of love than no love at all. So my guest is already up. Normally I'll introduce her, but we are doing a part two. This is Natalie Alexander. She's a licensed professional counselor and a relationship coach. But I want to just talk about before she comes on. Well, you see her, but before I just want to get the exact title because we did this episode and Natalie said, you know what? I want to have a part two to that. So give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. 1 second. But how you doing, Natalie?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Kendall, for having me back on here. I'm doing great. I'm just excited to have these conversations. We need to have these conversations more.
I know. It's so important to have these conversations. All right, so give me 1 second. I wanted to get the exact title for those if they want to watch that first, because you were a guest on that episode. Mm-hmm. So Natalie Alexander, again, licensed professional counselor. She was my guest as we did an episode on Remixing Relationships this season, and it was called Settling for the Pieces. That was episode 11. So you guys have to look that up again. And as we were doing that, and we were concluding, if you watch that, she said, well, we got to do a part two. And then we had this conversation. So tell me first why you decided that you wanted to do a part two for Settling for the Pieces of Love.
Because I wanted us to do a part two because I was thinking about our part one. And our part one, we were saying, listen, ladies, you're worth more. You're worth the love that you want, and really just kind of speaking to self-value and self-love. And we were kind of highlighting the women that say, you know, I'd rather be a side person than, you know, that's good enough for me type deal. And I thought about it some more. And as a licensed professional counselor, as a therapist, I wanted us to look deeper at some of the reasons why women choose the relationships that they choose. They may not be ideal to the outside looking in. Like, how could you possibly settle to be a side person? Or how could you possibly settle for the crumbs? When the truth is, maybe because she's not accustomed to being loved. Like, what does that look like? There was no father, there was no uncles, there was no safe male in their community. But here's this man that has a wife, but wants to shower me with the things I've always wanted. Why wouldn't I take it? So it's kind of like I wanted to shed light on those women and show some empathy and compassion for their walk and their journey in finding love.
Yes. And I want you to play a reel, but before that, I want to welcome everyone back to Remixing Relationships, where we dive into topics that help you create healthy, fulfilling connections in every area of your life, especially, of course, relationships. We dive deep into the art of creating and sustaining healthy connections, right? I am Kendall Anish, your fave life coach, a remix coach, and together we'll explore fresh perspectives and strategies to transform your relationship. Whether you're looking to strengthen, heal, or completely remix your relationship, you're in the right place. So this episode, right, we are going to be exploring the powerful subject on how relationships with your father can influence the way you love your partner. Whether your father was present, absent, or nurturing, or distant in his role in your life, has likely shaped your approach to love and relationships in ways you may not even realize.
Mhm.
But don't worry, because here at Remixing Relationships, we believe it's never too late to remix your life. All right, we're
Mhm.
going to dive in. Natalie, play the reel, and then we're going to get into it.
All right, here we go.
Please.
Here we go.
To understand, speaking to me, the father wound shows us early that love is uncertain and conditional. This wound takes root when fathers remain emotionally distant, speak in a critical tone, or when addiction clouds their ability to nurture. The child starts to understand that their emotional needs won't be met, leading them to adapt and survive in whatever way they can. Without a healthy paternal foundation, they lose their authentic sense of self. This creates a pattern of seeking validation through relationships that reflect their earliest wounds. They become unconsciously drawn to people who share similar traits to their father.
Okay,
Whether
stop right there, because I don't want them to say we don't own the right. Stop right there.
There we go.
All right. Thank you. So tell me what you heard right there, and what about that video you said, I'm gonna send that to Kendall, and we need to explore that some more.
So let me just. It was something. Blah, blah, blah. It was something. There we go. Hold on. Unavailability. Hold on. They lose it. Nope. The child starts to understand that their emotional needs won't be met, leading them to adapt and survive in whatever way they can.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not being met by the paternal, but the woman meets a man, specifically talking to women, meets a man who like can give her something like, we can go out every weekend. I'll share this weekend time with you. Well, it's better than something she never had before. So she'll adapt. It may not be principally what she may want, but this man is offering something she'd never had. So she's going to adapt because some needs are being met.
Right. So I want to read this, because as we were talking about that, I said, let me go deeper with that. So our relationships with our fathers, right? They create some of the earliest blueprints for how we understand love, trust, and intimacy. If your father showed love in healthy ways, you might carry those positive lessons into your own relationship. On the other hand, as you're talking about, if he is absent or emotionally unavailable or critical, you might find yourself struggling with these things like trust, self-worth, communication. This doesn't mean that your past defines you, as we know, but it also gives us clues and patterns we might want to address and remix, right? So when we talk about, I'd rather have a piece of man than no man at all. Unfortunately, I've heard more than one woman say that. What does that sound like to you, and what do you think that has to do with the scraps and, like I just said, not knowing your worth?
Essentially, we all have a human need to be loved and to be in relationship and to be connected, and there really is a void when there's not a healthy paternal presence. There is a void, and some women try to fill it with work and being a boss lady and all the things, whatever. But other ladies, once they meet a man that shows them the attention that they have internally longed for, she's not going to pass it up. Given her past, like given the context of not having a present paternal figure, right? So it's about filling a need. It's about filling a void. And like I said earlier, I want to speak to that because I don't want women who are out there that know that it's just a scratch, but I don't know how to get out of it, to feel bad, feel like they don't have a sense of worth and a sense of self. They very well may feel confident about who they are, but it's just this area. It's like, oh, like he's still giving me what I've always wanted and he's meeting these needs. Speak to them like, all right, sis, he's meeting your needs, but there are other ways to meet those needs where you don't have to put up with that. And it's a process, it's a road, it's a journey that needs to be walked with us, you and myself and other coaches and therapists that care and are non-judgmental, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about some common ways your father's influence might show up in these. If the male's father is not showing up, they're very similar. I don't hear a man say I'd rather have a piece of love than no love at all, but men accept that as well. They accept the crumbs as well, and
Mm-hmm.
not even realizing it, but it's not the same statement that a woman would make. So let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about seeking validation. If your father was critical or distant, you might find yourself for constant reassurance. So you notice we're not saying if your father wasn't there, because your father could be there, present, or but be emotionally unavailable, or he might be distant, or you may not have a certain type of relationship. So it doesn't necessarily mean the absentee father. So let's pause and talk about seeking for validation.
Yeah, seeking for validation can come in various forms. Meaning, you'll find the perfectionist. You'll find the woman that is highly successful, really, seeking perfection, is doing well for all intents and purposes, as far as the naked eye can see, but internally still needs to know that she's beautiful, still needs to know that she's smart, still needs to know that, she's doing a great job, which she's doing all the things, but internally needing that thing. Those words, those validating words. I had a
Right.
conversation. With on a podcast a few weeks ago with my colleague Cody Martin. Shout out to Cody Martin. And I was asking him like about his daughters who, when they have a pretty dress on, they come to they come to wherever he is. Look, Daddy, look at this dress, and they twirl for him. And I'm like, is that right? He's like, yeah. So then what happens when you say, yeah, baby girl, it looks good? He says they smile, they twirl again, and then they leave the room because their cup has been filled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When a child's cup is not filled,
Yeah.
they become whiny,
That's deep.
irritable. Yeah. I mean, it's just the natural process of things, right? So let me take things a little bit further. There's a group of, I've heard from several men, the complaint that women put makeup on, they put the wigs on, the eyelashes on. Why do they do that? Men don't care. We don't care about that. They just want the natural woman. They just do it for themselves and do it for each other. That's still a seeking for validation. And,
Mm-hmm.
It'll almost never be enough if it's not coming from the source that they need it to come from. And if they can't get it from their father, we
Yeah.
have to be able
The
to
cup will never be full.
learn to self-heal and give ourselves individually the thing that we needed. And I think that's the next
Yeah.
step to no longer taking the crumbs.
Yeah. And I think that's very good. Very good. When I look at, like, you just reminded me when you were telling the story about your friend, it reminds me of some of the TikTok videos and the Instagram videos where you're seeing daddies and daughters, or sons and moms, or vice versa, mothers and sons, just those warming ones where even though they're adults or older, they still want that approval from their parent. They still want that validation, especially the little ones. And like you said, twirling, Daddy, am I pretty? It's this
Mm-hmm.
one family on. It's a millennial family. It's a son and a daughter, and then the spouses, and they're young.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the cutest thing when the dad is having the tea party, or the dad is validating that little girl and whatever she's saying. And that
Mm-hmm.
does matter.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not getting that for any reason, whether your father is there, not there, emotionally unavailable, or just working all the time, there is a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
With
Mm-hmm.
that, let's talk about struggles with trust. That is a common pattern. An absent or an inconsistent father might lead to difficulties in trusting others or feeling secure in their relationships. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I remember having a conversation with a woman who, met a really nice guy, and they spent a lot of time together and they were bonding and connecting. And after like a month or so, he was like, okay, I guess he thought that the relationship was stable and it was what it needed to be. So then he started to go to work and be less available. She had a whole meltdown and called him and cussed him out and left messages and texts, and he walked away. He was like, I'm good. And that was an example of the abandonment trigger. Like, you're here and then you're not, without a clear expectation. And men tend to do that in dating sometimes, and it's not necessarily a love bombing thing. It's really like, okay, I'm showing you that I like you, I'm showing you that I'm into you, I'm showing you that I believe you're a great woman, great partner. And so when he thinks, okay, everything's cool and settled,
Right.
does his thing, because really men have to work. We all have to work, actually. But if we have a working man that's like focused on goals and needing to build up his coins and stuff, he can't stay on the phone all day and all night with you. He can't be under you all day and all night. He's got to make the move. But that can be a trigger for women that have not experienced a physically present father. Then they start going internal. What did I do? Like, I'm not taking this BS, and et cetera, et cetera. And it really becomes a thing.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I just did a mock the other day. I did a mock video when I was talking about attachment styles, because that's where they come from when you're a child, on the difference in somebody in relationships. A relationship that had a stable attachment style, and then different attachment styles. And it's so true, because it's interesting, because everybody brings out something different in the person. And like you said, triggers and different things like that. But if you had a father who was validating and, like we're talking about, and assured you, or trusting, as we're on now, then it's easier for a person to trust. If a father broke a child's trust, then it may be difficult for that person to trust. So anytime they're out of the woman or man's sight, they're going to think that they're doing something, because they, right off the rip, they don't trust them. Or they say, I didn't trust my father, or I trusted my father would be here and he wasn't, or I trusted my father would listen and he wasn't. So now a lot of men are paying for what the father didn't do unknowingly. That's why it's so important to heal and really understand and really go through this process. And with shows like this, or the reels that you see, it's really trying to seek help. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know they need help until they keep bumping their heads against the wall, or they're accepting pieces of love, or they can't get into a relationship because of all the trauma they've experienced.
Yes. And there's a common conclusion that people come to. If my father couldn't even stay here, then, who's going to stay? If I can't even trust my father, then who can I trust? And not being able to make the separation between, that was your father. He's a whole different person than this man here who is professing his love and dedication and commitment to you. Two different people. They happen to be male, obviously, but they're two different people with two different reference points and two different goals. And so, working through the process of detaching the trigger from the trauma, of having compassion for your father, what his life story, and letting that go, so that you can be present with yourself and engage and accept the goodness of what you are receiving, assuming that it is good and that you've done the work to actually discern and decipher that this is a good relationship and is good for you.
Right. Because you can have a healthy relationship and ruin the relationship because you are bringing your wounds, your daddy wounds. And in my book, I talk about, your Unhealed is Shown. I talk about mommy wounds and I talk about daddy wounds. I have met men with mommy wounds to the point where, and I talk about this in my book, where because of my complexion, he was like, I normally don't date somebody who is light skinned or light complected. And I was like, that's kind of ignorant. In my head, I'm like what? But then later I found out his mommy wounds were significant. His mom was very fair. complected, and she was very not present. She had an addiction, and the father pretty much, even though both parents were there, the father pretty much raised the children. And I was wondering, I was like, that's kind of, and we were together, and the more I understood his story and saw his story, and then when I met his mom, I was like, okay. And when he starts telling me, I was like, okay. So a lot of men have mommy wounds and daddy wounds, and a lot of women have both.
Yes.
Why do you think that people always think women have daddy wounds and men have mother wounds? Because sometimes it is reversed.
Yep.
There's a lot of, unfortunately, Black men who did not grow up with a father, or if they did, they were working all the time, trying to put food on the table. I talk to people and say, my dad worked. I never saw my dad. And my dad lived in the house, but he worked all the time. Why do you think people just assume that women have daddy wounds and men have mommy wounds?
I think that people just assume that because of how those wounds show up in heterosexual relationships.
Yep.
That's pretty much how they rise to the top when dealing with somebody of the opposite sex. It shows up like, oh, okay, then that's a daddy wound. Oh, that's a mommy wound. Versus otherwise, it just shows up sooner in that way with the opposite sex.
Yeah. Very well said. Very well said. Okay. And I break that whole thing down in my book because I want people to heal. And this podcast is all about healthy relationships and promoting healthy relationships.
Yes.
But you can't have a healthy relationship if the two people involved are not healthy. If they haven't had some type of therapy, counseling, come to Jesus moment, whatever it is, if they haven't recognized their triggers and their trauma, and they have not wanted or haven't yet done something about it, then you can't have a healthy relationship. You can't have a healthy relationship if one person is healthy and the other isn't. So I'm a firm advocate when people are out there dating. Listen, if you're dating, and if a man or a woman says, I don't need therapy or counseling or even coaching, I'm good, or they say, that's for such and such type of people, run the other way, because we all need help. And that's somebody that's not willing to grow. That's not somebody you want, in your corner, in a relationship, in a partnership. As on this podcast, we've talked about purpose partnership. I think it's important for everybody to get some type of help. All right, so let's talk about another common pattern, recreating patterns. You talked a bit about it. Sometimes we subconsciously choose a partner who mirrors our father's traits for better or for worse. Let's talk about it.
I mean, I think that statement pretty much speaks for itself. Me personally, my father was critical. He was harsh, and in his speech, he did not speak to me. He was unhappy. He was unhappy with my mom, and I mean, he was committed to the marriage. But he didn't laugh a lot. It was just very, very serious man. And so when I was looking for a mate, I wanted my main qualification was that he needed to be nice, because I was working from the reference point of how mean or harsh my father was towards me. So I met a guy, my ex-husband. He was nice. He still is very nice. However, he didn't talk. There was not a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening, and he wasn't critical because he was nice.
Right.
And so some of the other things, that I didn't come across, but the nice, quiet guy. It was really just something. And then I became.
So you went polar opposite,
and still ended up with somebody like my father.
How so?
I mean, he just didn't talk. He was quiet. He wasn't. It was very. Was he serious? He was kind of serious, and just unhappy. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't make for compatibility, right? And at the time, I didn't really know myself. I was locked in, lost in the church, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and just lost in what I thought God wanted me to do and who God wanted me to be, and did the right thing and married a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than being harsh and mean whenever my ex-husband was unhappy or, not pleased with something I did or said, he would just go silent. So
Yeah.
it didn't work for me. It didn't work. There wasn't a lot of growth. There wasn't a lot of communication.
Yeah.
And, when things like that happen, relationships have to balance out. So I started to, talk more, maybe talk too much sometimes. And I became the one pointing out the flaws and,
Yeah.
the one trying to communicate and push the growth forward and
Yeah.
change things. And it just fueled more resentment, more silence,
Yeah.
more, all of that stuff. So it really was just a hot mess.
Yeah. And then when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about emotional walls. And even though he was there, he was still emotionally unavailable.
100%.
So, right. So it's difficult when you might mirror that behavior. You might mirror that behavior. You you're talking about looking for someone, right? Who
Mhm.
is maybe the opposite. You say your father was mean or hard and he didn't seem happy. So you were looking for somebody and you found someone. But what I want to talk about is when the woman mirrors her dad. For instance, you might mirror the behavior if you've seen your dad shutting down, didn't
Mm,
want to have conversations, shutting
mm.
down. He always avoided conflicts or he avoided being vulnerable. You might mirror that. It's interesting because you might mirror the thing that you didn't like and you don't want. But I always say more is caught than taught. So you might not even just looking for the person, you might be that person.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm
Not
not
you per
familiar with that
se, but
dynamic.
mhm.
Pardon me?
I said not you per se, but you in general. I'm like,
Yeah,
you.
no, you in general, but I'm saying I'm not familiar with that concept. It doesn't sound familiar to where I've seen
Mhm,
it in
mhm.
my practice or anything like that, where the
Yeah.
person mirrors that absent parent. Mm,
But think about that. You know how when women say, "I will never be like my mother," and they're exactly like their mother
yes, that
and
part.
don't even realize that they're exactly like it. So a woman could be exactly like her father, even if she doesn't like that.
Okay, I have met somebody like that. Yeah, and every time that person realizes that they're like their father, they get upset. They get like they get upset. They don't want to be that person. So, yeah, it's a real thing. There was something else that I wanted to say to that point about reflecting. Ooh, there are many women, and this is common also, that for the absent father, the father that wasn't, or mother that wasn't there, they actually become motherly to everybody else, and
Mhm.
um, fill in everybody else's gap, and is the
Mhm.
nurturing mom like thing, and some men do the same thing as they grow older, like they become the father, the mentor to everybody else because he didn't get it. And that's very common also.
Yeah, it is because you're giving what you never had and you don't even know it. And
Mhm.
that's the thing. I think about father wounds and I think about um all the men, especially the black men. There are a lot of fathers around, a lot of great fathers, but even if a father was there and they're hard on the guy, you know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like really hard
Mhm.
on them.
Mhm.
They can't catch a break. They're always criticizing, or I work with children and the man up and don't cry and don't show
Mhm.
emotions and feelings. A lot of men grow up to have resentment towards their fathers, but then they
Mhm.
grow up like their fathers where they're not crying, they're not vulnerable, they're like statues sitting there, you know. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yes, because who's going to teach them to be anything other than what they've already learned? You said it
That
correctly,
part.
but you caught it. it's better caught than taught. What's your saying there?
Yes, better. More is caught than taught.
More is caught than taught. And so men are either, a lot of men are winging it, like they didn't get, they weren't taught, so they're just kind of like trial and error, mostly error. Or they're just kind of defaulting to what they've seen all their lives and what they know works for them. And so other men develop a sense of charm or manipulation. And, we're really mad at men that manipulate, but it's really, them meeting a need that was never filled. So we're just out here surviving and doing what we have been taught to do, intentionally or unintentionally taught.
Yeah.
We're just doing what we know.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And earlier you talked about abandonment and the fear of abandonment. You talk about a woman feeling like the man is going to leave even if he's going to the store. My video I did, and I was like, wait a minute, are you sure you're coming back? With those attachment styles. And I did the difference between a healthy attachment style and a dependent. I forgot which attachment style I did. But like I showed what it looks like. It's different from us saying, but then when somebody's like, you going to the mailbox? Are you coming right back? The dude is like, I'm just going to the mailbox. But are you coming right back? Right. Can I go to the mailbox? They at the mailbox. Like, it's real. It's real. But so with the fear of abandonment, you might have an underlying fear that your partner will do the same that your father did, whatever that was. The fear that it can lead to being overcompensating, right? Tap dancing for somebody, getting somebody to see, like you were talking about, validation. And what you were talking about with the little girl, like, Daddy, do you like my dress? I'm going to do a twirl. How when you are therapizing, I love saying therapizing, but when you have a client in your office, what is something that you would say if they came in saying, listen, I don't like men are this, men are that, and then you find out as you dig deeper that there was a strong issue with the father? What are some of the things that you may say if somebody is listening and they've come to your office and they're seeking help and you find out that they're in the man haters club and it all stems from their dad?
I would encourage a conversation. We would have a conversation about the differences between this man and their father and the men that they say that they hate. And so, and I remember, having a conversation with a woman whose motto was "men ain't shit." But then was wondering why she couldn't find, a good guy. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, you're attracting what your words are attracting those types of men.
Right.
And if you're talking about men ain't shit, well, you're looking for men ain't shit, you're going to find them. They're going to come to you and then they will validate that belief system.
There you go.
So it's really about talking about your thought process. What are you saying? Why? Right. And for the men haters, it's really about your emotions. What's happening emotionally? Who hurt you? Let's heal that part of you so that you can actually see that that humanity is flawed and we all have characteristics that can, evoke hatred or evoke dislike. We all do.
Yeah.
But then, how are you feeling? What's happening emotionally? But it all starts with self-acceptance.
Yes.
What's yourself? How do you feel about yourself? Like, how much can you like yourself? We'll talk about that. I would spend time on that first. Then we can start to see, the goodness in other people. Oh, that man at the gas station was really kind to me. Oh my gosh, the guy that opened the door and smiled at me. Men aren't bad.
Right.
Just some men are, and the percentage is very small, to be very honest with you, of sociopathic or just hateful men. And so, yes, there are narcissistic men out there, but they also are wounded. They also have a mom wound. So they're suffering, whether they want to agree to it or not, narcissistic men, for example. But I just encourage a sense of compassion, a sense of self-awareness so that we stop pointing at I don't like and I hate, versus like, let me
Mhm.
just love me. Let me just sit with me for a little while and accept me and do my internal work. Then we can talk about other people or
Yeah.
men, how you perceive them and how you want to show up and relate to them in your community.
Yeah. That was really good. That was good. I used to work with a lady, and a lot of people do this. If they have an issue with a man, right? They're like, you know how men are. Men ain't never going to tell you that they love you. Men ain't never going to, stay. All men are going to cheat. And
Mhm.
I would stop her in her tracks. You know how men are. I was like, no, all men are not the same. All men, some men do the dishes. Some men do kiss their wives when they get home. Some men do play with their children but she would always generalize. These men, they're all the same. I would say, no, they're not all the same. And
Mhm.
people speak from a place of being wounded. And
Mhm.
because her husband was showing traits like her
Mhm.
dad,
Mhm.
she thought, and she was in the marriage for like 30 years, she thought, and she may still think, that that's normal. If you
Mhm.
see a level of normalcy in your household, whether it's healthy or not, then
Mhm.
you're going to think that a husband acts or responds like this because your dad responded like this to your mother, or your uncle responded like this to his wife, or your next door neighbor, whoever you saw, or
Right.
whoever fathered you, or you saw in a father role,
Right.
you're going to automatically think that they're going to act as such.
Right.
And that's the part that needs to be healed. But a lot of people are in unhealthy relationships and have no idea,
Right.
because generational patterns have been passed down, and they think that is the norm,
Right.
because nobody was getting therapy back then. And then you have these mothers and grandmothers saying, you know how men are. All men are going to cheat, or all men are going to do this because somebody's granddaddy, somebody's father. And then
Mhm.
it just trickles down, and people
Mhm.
are choosing poorly or
Mhm.
accepting any kind of piece of love
Mhm.
in the sake of having love because they're thinking that's normal. Get into that.
I I'm thinking about a woman, to your point, that grew up with her mom and stepfather and siblings, and the stepfather would beat on her, right? And whenever, like, he would come whenever the mom was asleep or whatever, like, kind of just push her around and just be really mean and cruel to her. And when she became a teenager and started dating and got into a little disagreement with her boyfriend, she like flinched, right? And the boyfriend was like, why are you doing that? She was like, well, I just thought that that's what happens when you get upset. You're gonna hit me. And I was like, no, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, she assumed
Yeah.
that that's just how things are supposed to be. And it took her a long time to heal from that, and still healing as a grown woman. And
Yeah.
it's real. Our expectations of what we think is normal in a home, that's not normal.
That's not normal.
It's
And
not
that's
healthy.
and that's what I tell people. I'm like, you think that you were in a healthy relationship. You were not. If I'm coaching people or someone, a friend, because I don't coach just because. If somebody asks me a question or they say something, I'm like, that's not healthy. Like,
Mm,
it's not healthy that your dad or the men you see never talk to your mom,
mm.
but you're bragging that they were together 60 years.
Right.
But they never ate dinner together. They never talked. He worked all the time. And you think and you mirror the same behavior. Now, this one man gets into a marriage and he does the same thing
Right.
and thinks it's normal because he saw this all the time.
Right.
And then that just trickles right on down to all these generations of unhealthy relationships.
Right. I want to speak, if I can, just kind of turn left,
Sure.
just go down another path. I want to
Mhm.
speak to those of us who get into relationships to fix what we saw our parents go through. So
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and that's very common also. So I've come across couples where, the woman's father, was absent or disrespectful to her mom, and so she makes this conclusion like, no ninja's gonna disrespect me, and she gets married to a good guy and all of a sudden starts reading him his rights all day all night, and just becomes emotionally unavailable, and just her emotional intelligence is low because she's so focused on making sure that he doesn't disrespect her the way her father disrespected her mom, and there's a total disconnect from the
Like, I'm
actual
not gonna let
relationship.
nobody do that to me before
Yes.
the guy ain't even thinking about doing it to you.
Yeah, I didn't think about it. There are men who have watched their mom live in sadness and despair because dad wasn't in the home, or dad was just, all the things that you described earlier. And so
Mhm.
as a little boy, he decides, I'm going to make my woman happy. And so he finds a woman that may be depressed a little bit, and so his goal is, I'm going to make her happy. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to love her. I'm going to be nice to her. And just not realizing that it's not your job to make your woman happy. She
Yep.
has to find happiness internally or
Inside job.
contentment. And because it's really it's not going to matter whatever it is that you do. And many men find that out a few years into the marriage,
Mhm.
because it's like, well, no, I want flowers. Why did you buy this flowers? No, I need you to do the dishes. Well, why didn't you do the whole kitchen? Well, no, we need to have sex more. You having sex too much. Like, it's just never enough.
Mhm.
And so based on that, or men that make those kinds of promises to themselves end up um, cheating because they
Yep.
don't feel like they can be their true selves with their
Mhm.
partner, not because she's
Mhm.
doing anything wrong, but because he sees himself more like his father.
Mhm.
And he's like, well, if I'm like him, I'm going to do what my father did and make my woman unhappy. So he keeps himself to himself and goes and cheats, and with a woman he's not connected to, just because he could just be his full authentic self.
Mhm.
um, Esther Perel, world-renowned therapist from Belgium, I think, she talks about that kind of dynamic, and it's such a significant finding that
Yeah.
really helps me in my work.
Yeah, I love that because you're mirroring. That's what I was talking about
Okay,
earlier.
okay, all
Yes,
right,
you're
okay.
mirroring that behavior and
Mhm,
not even knowing. It's like
mhm,
because it's innately in you. And as
mhm,
you talked about your dad, and while you were talking about your dad, being hard and unhappy, I think about mine. Like I think about mine, and he wasn't in the house for majority of my life. When I was little, yes, but outside of that, no. And
mhm,
we lived in different states at a majority of our time, and then back and forth. But I always, as a young child, knew the dynamics, like my grandparents, his parents, we were always, connected. And then my father, if I had a track meet or if I had a birthday or if I had a this, but he wasn't there on the day-to-day basis. He lived out of state, very
mhm,
clear on who my dad was. And when I was younger, I was okay. Like, I wasn't home, like, I wish my dad was here. And I
mhm,
was coaching a client, and she said she's so angry at her dad. She would visualize him being there, and she was so angry that he wasn't there.
mhm,
And she really needed, and I thought about that as she was talking. I was like, I never yearned or wanted or wished.
mhm,
A lot of my friends grew up with their dads there. We would go over there. I never said, I wonder why my dad isn't here. And
mhm,
I had a good childhood, and I thought I was fine until I
mhm,
was 29. And when I was 29 and I saw my sisters with him, and I was like, "Oh, snap." I was pregnant with my second daughter. I was like, "Oh, snap. I think I did miss something."
mhm,
It doesn't seem like their connection, it doesn't seem the same. But when I was younger, I never thought about it
okay,
because as a younger person, because that was the dynamics. I always knew I would see him here, or I would go there, or he would come, or my grandparent. I already knew how the thing was working.
got you.
And that's how it had been most of my life because,
Right.
we hadn't lived in the same house since I was little.
Mhm,
So I didn't even realize that I had a father wound until I was almost 30 years old. And I was like, oh, snap. So then I started having conversations with my father. It started asking questions, you know, to be honest, he wasn't trying to hear it. He had his own guilt and stuff that he was dealing with, you know, but I started having conversations with him and asking him questions and different things like that. And we had to go through a healing process that I started.
Okay.
Because I didn't know. So sometimes you don't even know.
Right.
You know, you have in the same scenario, the one lady was like, she would lay in the bed and she would cry. She yearned. She wanted him there. He had never been there, but she would see other kids and wanted it. I would go to my friend's house and say, hey, Mr. John, or hey, Mr. and not even think about it. It's so interesting until I saw certain things or I see things now and I go, as an adult, as you know, someone that is committed to healing, committed to, you know, really recognizing. I coach myself, honey. I will go in. Why do you respond like this? Why does that affect you? Why does that bother you? Oh, I break it down, honey. I tear it apart because I want to be the best version I can be. And I want to know why so I can heal those parts. And I teach others, of course, to do the same. I'm not going to be that person like you need this. I'm going to look at me. And I remember as I've gone through, you know, healing journeys, I would look at everything and I discovered I was like, oh, shoot. Understand what you think about that? I see your little face. What you get ready?
I mean, I'm really, I can't really add much to that experience. I'm hoping, I'm pretty sure that there are people in the audience that can relate to that. But it's very interesting. I don't know if it's unique, but it's very interesting to me. You know, just after having said that we all have a void, but you didn't recognize that need or that wound until you were well into your adulthood.
Isn't that something?
It's very interesting. Yeah.
It is.
And to your point, I didn't know that I was emotionally neglected until the end of my marriage. And I was in my almost 50.
So emotionally neglected by your dad, you didn't even realize that.
Yep.
See, you came to a revelation later too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How so? What kind of triggered that for you to be like,
just coming to grips with the state of my marriage, what I needed. I'm trying to articulate it to my pastor, what I needed, what was wrong, and describing some of the things that I experienced. It was like, wait a minute, I was neglected. And wow. And just so disconnected from, you know, my father, from my husband. And that was when I realized. I remember throughout the marriage, I used to grieve and cry at the disconnect between my mother and myself. But my relationship with my father really never came up when we
so
were
you
married.
had mother wounds and you were so focused on you had a lot of mother wounds.
Yes.
And then so focused on that, you didn't realize that you had father wounds.
Correct.
That's powerful. We got to talk about mother wounds because when I said mother wounds, your whole face.
Yes.
Yep. Isn't that something though?
Yes.
And it's so many people out there having, I guarantee you, every single person that's watching this show live or the playback, they have a mother wound or a father wound. Definitely get my book, Your Unhealed is showing. It's not even a promotion thing like, hey, go to Amazon. It is there, but so you can understand some of the things. And as I'm talking to you and as I think about different things, my grandfather, even though he was out of state, when I tell you I was his baby, honey, I was his baby. That was, like I always say, and I know my family loved me and they showed, but I always say if I had a doubt anybody loved me, I know that man did. Like I was his baby. And still to this day, he passed away in 2000. To this day, family members will be like, you know, you were his baby. I'd be like, yep. So maybe because that, even though my grandfather didn't live in the same state or in my house,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we did when I was younger, we were all together.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe because I had that love that was so rich and deep that I can feel it, see it, smell it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that, and because even though that was from a distance, so maybe because I was still loved, maybe because I was still loved by my
Yes.
mom, my
Yes.
grandparents, my cousins, maybe because I didn't lack love growing
Yes.
up, I
Yes.
didn't miss my dad being there, because I
Right.
knew if I had something, he would take the drive down, or here's my surprise birthday. Okay, he's
Mhm.
here. Maybe
Mhm.
because I knew the dynamics early. And it's interesting. I was a very mature child, yet still a
Mhm.
child. But my mom says I came out independent and mature. I
Interesting.
feel like I'm more immature now, like,
Yeah, your point
so
that you
maybe
just made.
that's
Oh, sorry.
why.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the point that you just made circles back to our original point about that void that women have, that will just choose any man to meet that need. You didn't. It doesn't seem that you had a void. You knew you were loved. I may have mentioned in one of our other podcast conversations where I was convinced, Kendall, you could not tell me different. I was convinced that I was unloved. I was convinced that my
By
father
your dad or by your mom or
by
anybody?
both, to the point where, like, anybody, like, I was just
Oh,
unloved. I remember my very first therapy session, and I was sharing, and then the therapist sat back and said, "Are you lovable?" And I was like, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that. I have no idea. No idea. And it
oh.
really, oh yeah, it's very sad. And I'm low key fighting back tears. It's really something that I'm really just now coming to grips with, that I'm
It
lovable.
hurts my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. And I don't know that it was something that was intentional. I don't know. That it was intentional for my father to convey that. Um, but I was convinced. I was convinced that I wasn't. And I know that I was, from choir members and people and friends that people I showed up for. But there's a difference between being loved and knowing that you're loved and believing that
Yeah.
you. And I think that many women still don't have that connection. Um, and it plays out in the type of men that they choose,
Yep.
and the things that they accept that they should not, that people on the outside looking in, like I was saying earlier, girl, you're better than that. Girl, you don't need, it's like they stay because they don't see it, because of what they believe ultimately about themselves and about men and all the things that we just talked about. So yeah, we didn't know that the conversation would have taken this turn, huh?
But no, it's real though.
Yeah.
It's real because I feel you in my soul, and I know somebody else does, because as you're talking, it almost makes me cry because I'm thinking about them. And that's why these conversations are so important.
Yeah.
Even though I was loved and I felt love through action, because love is action, right? With some things, and later when you grow up, my father used to always be like, I love you, my first child, but he had his own trauma, and that was his own guilt saying that. But because I never said, hey, I don't think you love me. You get what I'm
Right.
saying? So
Right. Right.
people will project. So he must known he wasn't doing the best job that he should have done. And we had those
Right.
conversations. But it's so interesting too, as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about how with my grandfather always felt like his baby and a little girl, but because I was so mature and could read at like 4 years old and was doing this, sometimes I felt like a little adult. So
Yeah.
when somebody needs something, how do I want to say this? So you know how some kids, people really baby, like,
Mhm.
not saying, of course they did that when I was a baby. Obviously,
Mhm.
they weren't like,
Right.
go do the dishes at
Right, right, right,
2.
right, right.
But I'm saying, you know how some children are even like 7 or 8 and they're still, oh, do. I didn't get that at that age
Mm.
because I was mature.
Mhm.
And when I think about it now, I probably would have wanted a little goo at
Uh-huh.
7, you know,
Oh,
and I'm not saying that I didn't. I'm thinking about just in general. I could have, like, if my mom was listening, she'd be like, we did. But that's not first memory if I see it with someone else. And
right.
then with working with kids, I see some kids that just in a weird way have it together.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
you see some kids who need more. And I remember
Mhm.
my mom used to be like, well, your brother needs more in this area.
Mm.
And people would be like, I know you'll be okay
Mhm.
because you can self-regulate and you could do where somebody else might need assistance. You
That's
get
in
what I'm saying?
Yeah, 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 that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. I'm wondering if, for a couple things, Kendall, I'm wondering if you if at any point you felt emotionally responsible or responsible for other people's emotions in the
Child,
room.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you
Mhm.
were probably what we call parentified, like you had to be grown so that some of the grown people could depend on you, and so kind of
Like,
your
I had to take care of my brother. He's 6.5 years younger than me. That was like my first baby. I wanted to do that. I
oh
remember
yeah,
I would be like this. If my mom lifted his pamper, there'd be poop. I'd be like, literally, my mom would tell you this, give it to me, I'll change him. And I would be changing like his mother, and I would be like, let me go get his bottle. Like, you
oh
know
wow,
what I mean? Like, I was really like, that was my baby. And
okay,
then, you know, if my mom was working, then I would be, you know, he would be with me. So that was like my baby.
hmm,
You know,
yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't, it was like, you know, and then but I did kid stuff. I did a lot of great things as a child.
oh,
I danced on TV. I was in the performing
okay.
arts. I was
Oh,
doing, like, I did a lot of things, and I'm grateful that my talents and my creativity in who I was
yes,
cultivated. I'm so
yes,
grateful for that. But
yes.
I still was like a little mom,
Hmm.
little mom.
Yeah.
And some of it me taking the role over.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And
really
then
insightful.
some hmm?
Yeah. I said that's really insightful.
I told you I'd be pulling everything apart, girl. Because that's how you heal and that's how you know yourself. There's nobody out there that can say, I know you better than you know yourself. Nope. Because you ain't took the time.
Right. Right.
You ain't
Right.
take the time. But it's interesting how those things do play a part.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you feel that way. And
Yeah.
when we're talking about father wounds here, guys, and Natalie was talking about mother and father wounds, and that was an emotional moment where she said, you know, she didn't realize she was lovable.
Mhm.
And I know there's somebody out there feeling the same way, and I think we all feel like we've lacked love somewhere down the line.
Mhm.
And I think about my first, like, boyfriend, if you would say, and it
Mhm.
was in junior high school. And he's still on Facebook now, and he still checks on me every now and then, right? But I
Mhm.
think because that was such a good experience, and I was young. I was
Mhm.
like 8th grade. He was like in high school. He would walk from the high school and come pick me up from my junior high and walk me home. And he
Oh,
was very sweet, kind, like protective, funny, cared. So I didn't have a bad experience in my introduction to love per se.
okay.
And I think that kind of set a pace if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Where the first like official, like, whatever that was back then, but that was, and he was very nurturing and caring at that point,
Okay.
and that was the introduction into relationships where it
Okay.
set a bar high without even me knowing it was setting a bar.
Yes, that's a blessing.
Because I didn't think about that. I'm telling you, child, I didn't thought about stuff since I've been adult, going back and listen. And that's what I do with clients. It's so
Okay.
important. That's how you heal and really get to understand yourself in your journey, because we all have one.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So when you think about father wounds, and we'll do another show on mother wounds for sure,
Mm-hmm.
what was the biggest lesson you learned from your father that is instilled in you today as a woman? And two part. And what have you brought into relationships that you love, or that you like, I shouldn't have done that?
Mm-hmm. The thing that I've learned from my father that I know that he intentionally taught me was the value of education, the value of intelligence, and being articulate. It meant a lot to him that, I articulate myself as an intelligent woman. I am bilingual. I pause because I do speak, I'm functional in Spanish. So, and learned a couple other languages. So that's something that he holds in high regard, education and the value of intelligence. And so I definitely have carried that into my teaching my children the importance of being educated. And the thing that I've taken into relationships, that's a good question. That's a good question. I'm not in a relationship now. I'm not. The only other relationship that I was in was my marriage. So, for that I took in there would have been oh, my ex-husband said that I was critical. And to be honest, I don't know that I was. Um, no, I don't think I was. So I really don't know. I
Yeah.
really, I really don't know.
That's an honest answer. All right. So in remixing relationships, we're not going to just leave you there. We're going to talk about healing
Yeah,
father wounds, and then we're going to go,
yeah.
because remixing relationships is really promoting healthy relationships, right?
Mhm,
And you can't have a healthy relationship unless you're healthy and you do the work. We
mhm,
have to understand how everything that has happened in our lives play a part in the relationships that we're in, or seeking to find, or learning from past relationships. And
mhm,
sometimes women will marry and date their father, or sometimes women will date the total opposite. And
mhm,
sometimes women will date their father and not even realize they're dating their father, different
mhm,
traits or
mhm,
habits. It could be a great thing, it could be a mixed bag of nuts, it could be
mhm, mhm,
whatever it is. And
mhm,
it's just, we have to understand that even the wounds of your father,
mhm.
they need grace as well,
Yes.
because they were people too, trying to figure it out, trying
Yeah.
to understand this thing. And I think about my dad, he had me at 20, right?
Mm,
So I think about, and my mom was 18.
mm.
So I had young parents.
Yes.
And who the heck knows? I told my mom the other day, I was like, with everything, and my mom did a darn good job. And I'm not saying it just because of me. I'm talking about my brother. I'm talking about we, you know, great people, a lot of values instilled.
Nice.
And even as
Nice.
a young person, I just think about it. I'm like, she did an amazing job. And I told her the other day, I said, my mom was like, I was figuring it out as I went along. And with her parents did everything. And she said she didn't even realize when she got out, she was so sheltered and clueless. She was like, oh,
Mm.
we gotta pay bills. Because
Oh, wow.
my grandfather took care of everything. Even with my grandmother being a social worker for 1,000 years and a social life, they were raised like upper middle class.
Good.
So it was a different level. And then when my mom, she's like, she didn't even know like what the real world was even, So we were joking. And I said, Mom, I'm just happy you kept me alive. I said, you did a good job because I'm
There we go.
stuck.
There we go.
And people need to give parents grace, and
That's
even
true.
dads with the father wounds, because
Yes.
people really are doing the best that they
Yes.
can. And when they
Yes.
know better, they do better.
Yes.
And people didn't know back then that they were probably carrying their own father wounds.
Yes. Yes.
And then passing them down and mirroring them and trying to do the opposite, or unintentionally doing the same thing, whatever it is. So
Yes.
give your fathers and give your parents some
Right.
grace, right?
Yes.
Because they are human beings. Parents are people too.
Right. Right.
And even though a lot of children who are adults were affected by their parents, and and then it goes on and on and on, their people, we might affect them, and they might, it's just a history. And that's why it's so important. I always say, and people talk about, let's leave a legacy of a house or money. Let's leave a legacy of healing. Let's leave a legacy of coaching, therapy, counseling, to be better for the next generation. And hopefully every generation is going to be better. People working with the tools that they have, and some people don't even have tools. You ever go in somebody's toolbox and all they have is a screwdriver, a nut, a bolt, and a hammer? What you gonna do with that?
And trying to do everything with it.
Right. Yeah. Like, what you gonna do with and a measuring tape? What you doing with that?
Right.
People sometimes just don't have a lot of tools. So let's quickly talk about healing father wounds. So healing father wounds is a journey, but it's one that can lead to healthier relationships and better understanding of yourself. Acknowledge the wounds, y'all. The first step is recognizing that wounds exist. Stop saying everything was perfect, because you don't know.
Right.
Because you only know what you grew up with. So you don't know that something was wrong until maybe later. Right. So acknowledge that the wounds exist. Reflect on how your father's actions or inactions have affected your emotions, your behavior, and your relationships. Right. Number 2, forgive. For you, not them. We already know. Forgiving your father doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment, if that's somebody out there. Therapy or coaching, as we keep saying, a professional can help you unpack deep-rooted emotions and develop healthier relationship patterns. Reparent yourself. Give yourself, like Natalie was saying, give yourself love, affirmations, support you may not have received from your father. This could look like daily affirmations, journaling, surrounding yourself with nurturing relationships. Like Natalie, there's a lot, and I'm just so glad and I'm so grateful that you were very transparent, because you just shook somebody, and somebody is you or them. Yes. And I think we've all felt unloved at some point. Whether you say unlovable or just unloved, we've all felt those things at some point. And some of those feelings, 9 times out of 10, came from childhood. And why we feel less than, or why we feel rejected, or how we respond to abandonment, and all of those things, those are real. You can experience abandonment as a woman or a man, and your father was right in the house. People assume that if a person struggles with abandonment, then the father must have left or been out of the house. You can struggle with abandonment issues or rejection issues, and your father was sitting right there, removed. Talk about that for a moment, and then we're going to finish up the list and be out.
Well, pretty much just what you shared, Kendall. This is something that we really need to pay attention to, and like what you were saying, seek to have compassion, to hear your parent's story, and so that you can detach, like not make his story your story and blend it all together, so that you can have your own identity and have a view and a vision of what you want to do, how you want to live your life, free from that wound, and into your own environment, your own relationship that you are remixing, right?
Yep.
Because it's kind of like when we talk about remixing, you're baking a cake and you've got some ingredients, but not all the ingredients. Well, sometimes you have to add a little bit of this. When you add a little bit of butter or whatever, you got to remix it.
Come
Okay.
on.
And so that the cake will come out the way you want it to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have to use different ingredients so that the cake will taste the way you want it to cake.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately is your life.
Yes.
You have a wound, you fill the wound with what you said, with the self-parenting and self-love, and you move on with your life.
Yes.
That's what this is about. That's what healing looks like.
Come
But it's
on.
hard work and it takes time. And I
Yeah.
was talking to a client earlier today who started her healing journey, and today was our second session. She was like, oh my gosh, my emotions have been everywhere. And I said, oh, you probably thought it was going to be like a turnaround once you started using the skills, it was just going to heal. Like, no.
Child.
It takes time, it takes effort, it takes the support of your community. And I'd love for us to talk about that on another time, just the way our community shapes our relationships,
Yes.
romantic and otherwise.
Yep.
So that part, but all of that to say, healing takes time, it takes work, it takes intention.
Pause right there.
Yes.
It takes intention.
Yes.
So you could be two kinds of people. You can be a person that's not getting the best out of life or the best out of yourself, or not healing, because you are talking about your father wounds every day and all you're doing is talking.
Yes.
My father did this, my father did that, and you're not living your life because you're stuck. Your development was arrested and you're stuck there. Or you can say, listen, this happened. This, I never got to make amends, or I did get to make amends, or I did whatever it is. But you've decided that, you know what? My daddy's a person too. And even if you never get apology, or you got an apology, or if you did, whatever the situation is, because someone is out there like, well, my dad apologized. Well, my dad didn't. It doesn't matter, because you do have to self-parent and understand. And like Natalie said, move on in a healthy way. You can forgive somebody who is not here. You can forgive somebody on the phone. You can forgive yourself for whatever it is and move on, so you can have a healthy, productive life and relationship. You will never have a satisfying relationship. You will never have a satisfying connection if you don't forgive your father and try to heal yourself. That's going to therapy, going to counseling, coaching, unpacking, all three. Do all of them. So you can be the best version of yourself for yourself, because you are lovable and you deserve to have a healthy relationship.
Amen.
All right. 2 more. Communicate with your partner. Share your journey with your partner. Share your journey with your man. Let them know about your triggers. I believe in doing that. I will share my journey. I have, right? I let them know about the triggers and the steps I'm taking, or the steps you're taking to heal, so they can support you. That's what Natalie was saying. If you haven't done your work, if you're not a professional like us, pulling yourselves apart and really coaching or therapizing, counseling yourself, you may seek professional help and to do that, right? But it's taking the steps to recognize what's happening with you and to do something about it. Lastly, set healthy boundaries. If your father is still in your life and continues to harm you, or continues to, whatever is happening, it's okay to set boundaries to protect your peace.
That's right.
And I had to do that with my father one time. My father passed away 2019. We were good. That was my home. Love him. We were fine. But at one point, I did have to set boundaries because I was not liking how I felt when I was in his presence. And it was a moment in time. And that's a small piece to our large relationship. But there was a moment in time where I had to do that.
Right. Right.
for me.
Yeah.
Because I don't care who you are. I'm not going to be in your presence if I don't feel okay about it.
Right. 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 Right.
You
Good.
know?
Good. That's a good word. That's good there. That's good.
Absolutely. But I love my daddy. And we was good.
Mhm.
We was good. He
Oh,
said, one thing I know about you, he said, if anything happens, you gonna take care of me. He's like, you good. And he would say good things. And I would love to have a conversation with him now to be
yeah.
like, what did you think about this? Or what did you think about the
Mm.
pandemic? Because he would always have something to say. So I do see parts of me in him. And we're talking about father wounds. And I'm glad that I had the parents that I had,
Yeah.
because whether they did wonderfully or didn't do so well, it
Right.
still shaped me and made me the woman I am today. All right,
Mhm.
Natalie, you have the final words.
Final words is, hey, I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the conversation. I think we had a great conversation, brought it full circle to fill in the gaps. Our part two really filled in the gaps from part one. And I'm hoping those of you that are in the audience feel encouraged and motivated and inspired to take the next steps to healing and remixing your relationships. My name is Natalie Alexander. I am a licensed professional counselor and a clinical supervisor and relationship coach. I'm here to help, here to heal, and walk with you on your journey towards life and health.
Yeah. And I'm so glad. So if you heard her saying it was a good part two. So if you haven't seen one, definitely see it. It was called Settling for Pieces. For the pieces. And I used the Guy song, You Can Have a Piece of My Love. I use that because women are out here saying, I'd rather have a piece of man than no man at all, and settling for pieces. And that's because they may not think that they're lovable, or they may not think that they're worthy of love. So I'm glad Natalie said, hey, let's talk about why some of these women don't feel like that. And then we got into this subject. So I think this was powerful. Natalie, I thank you tremendously. You're always very transparent. You
Thank you.
always use your life and keep it all the way real. And I love people like that, because you're a professional. You know what to do. But a lot of times professionals will tell another person what they should do and want to hear all of their stories. But you're very grounded in who you are. And I see that you continue to grow
Mhm.
and learn.
Thank
And
you.
as you can see, it's a woman after my own heart. So I appreciate you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
So
you.
very much. All right. And I can't wait till January. So if you're watching and if you're in the ATL area, me and Natalie got something cooking, and we're having a
Mhm.
studio audience. So tell all your people down south, right? Tell all the people. Sidebar, when I was little and growing up in New Jersey, I was mad that I didn't have family down south. All my friends would be like, we going down south for the summer. And I was hot that I had nobody down south. But we are, so tell all your mama and them and all your people that we are gonna have a live show in Buckhead. Are we having a Buckhead?
We don't know
Okay,
yet.
we don't know. In
We don't know.
Atlanta
It's going to be in
in
Atlanta.
January.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So tell your people you're going to see her and I. And if you love this conversation and the conversations that Natalie and I have had on this show, you're
Mm-hmm.
definitely going to want to come. So more information to come. But thank
Yes.
you so much for joining us today as we explore new ways to remix and strengthen our relationships by talking about father wounds. When we
Yes.
heal ourselves, we heal our relationships. Remember, healthy relationships are within reach, and together we can create the love and life you deserve in a healthy way. I am your host, Kendall Anisha, Fave Life Coach, with a reminder: the power to transform is in your hands. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and keep loving. And remember, it is never, never, ever, 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 ever too late to remix your life at any stage, age, or phase.
All right.
Healing starts with you. God bless y'all. Peace. All right. All right. Nice, 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 nice. All right, Natalie, thank you so much. We'll be in touch soon, and we'll come up with what we're going to talk about when you're talking about mother wounds.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I see all of you, and thank you for your comments. Please share and subscribe.